Among the polished suits and sparkling laughter inside the city's most exclusive cafe stood a boy, a black boy hidden beneath a faded hoodie pressed against the iron fence. No one noticed him. No one cared to them. He was just another shadow, just another piece of background noise in a world built on gold and vanity. But today, as a billionaire lifted a silver spoon toward his mouth as polished smiles masked dark intentions, it was that shadow, it was that boy, it was that old hoodie that shattered the illusion. One voice ripped through the perfect afternoon, a cry full of fear, full of truth. Do not eat that. The cafe froze. Forks dropped, heads turned, and in that single heartbeat, the fate of a powerful man and the empire he built hung on the warning of a homeless boy they would have otherwise ignored. No wealth, no power, only courage, only truth. This is the story of a boy they tried to erase, but not today. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We would love to hear your thoughts. The scent of fresh bread and blooming flowers drifted through the afternoon air, carried by the breeze that swept along Willow Garden Cafe. The clinking of glasses, soft laughter, and the low murmur of business deals being whispered across linen-covered tables filled the space with a steady hum of importance. At a distance just beyond the ornate patio fence stood a boy, Tariq Evans, 13 years old. A black boy wrapped in a worn-out gray hoodie that hung off his thin frame like a heavy curtain. No one noticed him, not the suited men tapping away on tablets, not the perfectly coiffed women sipping sparkling water and gossip, not even the waiters gliding between tables with trays of artisan meals and $1,000 smiles. Tariq was used to being invisible. He leaned against the iron fence, hands deep in the pocket of his hoodie, head bowed slightly under the afternoon sun. The fence was more than metal. It was a line, a boundary between those who belonged and those who survived. His stomach growled a low reminder of how long it had been since he last ate something real. Still he stayed still, blending into the background, part of the scenery nobody wanted to talk about. He had learned long ago that silence was safer. Silence was armor. Tariq watched with quiet eyes, scanning the tables for opportunity. A leftover croissant, maybe. An abandoned glass of orange juice. He was not greedy. He just needed enough to make the hunger stop gnawing at his insides. Inside the patio, life played out like a movie he could never afford a ticket to. At the center table sat Harold Vaughn, the man whose face was printed on magazines and business journals all over the city, the billionaire, the king of concrete and steel. Across from him, Clarissa Vaughn, young enough to be his daughter and maybe even younger than that. She was stunning, dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, flawless makeup, red lipstick perfectly drawn, a bracelet glittered on her wrist, a bracelet worth more than Tariq's life. But Tariq was not looking at her beauty. He was looking at her hands. They trembled slightly. Not much, just enough that you would miss it if you were not trained to notice the things polite society preferred to ignore. Tariq had learned to watch hands. Hands told you everything. Hands twitched when someone lied. Hands tensed when someone planned something bad. Clarissa's hands were moving too quick, too careful as she adjusted her handbag, fingers brushing against something inside. Tariq narrowed his eyes. From the corner of his vision, he saw a waiter set down a steaming bowl of soup in front of Harold. The old man barely glanced at it, too busy checking something on his gold-trimmed phone. Clarissa leaned forward, her smile wide, her voice low. Too low to hear, her hand slipped beneath the tablecloth. There a small vial Tariq's breath caught in his chest. His heart hammered so loudly he wondered if anyone could hear it. He froze one foot, ready to run another, chained by the heavy pull of what he just saw. He watched helpless as Clarissa twisted the vial open with a practiced flick of her thumb. She tilted her hand over Harold's bowl. A few drops fell into the creamy white surface of the soup, disappearing without a trace. Nobody else saw. Nobody else cared. Tariq pressed himself harder against the fence, willing himself to become smaller, invisible. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he had imagined it. People like him were always wrong, right? That was what the world told him. Black boy, poor boy, troublemaker. But deep inside, he knew what he saw was real. He knew what was about to happen, and he knew. If he stayed silent, something terrible would unfold right before his eyes. Tariq bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood. He could walk away. No one would blame him. No one would even remember him. But his mother used to tell him something before the streets took her away. When you see wrong and stay silent, you become part of it. Tariq closed his eyes for a second, drawing in a shaky breath. The smells of buttered bread, sweet wine, and something darker filled his lungs. He opened his eyes. The world looked the same, but he was different now. He had seen too much, and he knew he could not walk away. Not this time. Tariq shifted his weight from one foot to the other, heart pounding so hard it made his vision pulse. The noise of the cafe faded into a dull roar, like he was standing underwater. He knew he was just a boy in a battered hoodie, a shadow standing outside the polished gates of their perfect little world. What right did he have to scream? What right did he have to interrupt? Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to melt into the background, to survive another day. But he couldn't. He could not unsee what Clarissa had done. He could not ignore the quiet evil hidden behind her glossy smile. Inside the patio, Harold chuckled softly at something on his phone, his spoon hovering over the bowl of poisoned soup. Clarissa leaned in, her red lips parting slightly, whispering something sweet that nobody else could hear. It would only take one sip, and everything would be too late. Tariq gripped the cold iron of the fence until his knuckles turned white. He looked around, searching for someone, anyone who might help. But the men in suits were too busy arguing about market shares. The women in designer heels were too busy posing for pictures. The waiters were too busy balancing plates and ignoring everything that did not carry a tip. No one saw him. No one would believe him. Just a dirty kid in a hoodie. Just another nobody. Tariq swallowed hard, feeling the dry scratch of fear climbing up his throat. He remembered something else his mother had told him once long ago, on a night when the heater broke, and they had huddled together for warmth. Being brave don't mean you are not scared. It means you do it anyway. Tariq took a step forward, then another. He left the fence behind and pushed through the small decorative shrubs lining the patio. Heads turned, eyebrows lifted, conversations stalled mid-sentence. Tariq's sneakers crunched on the gravel as he moved closer to the table at the center of it all. He could feel every eye stabbing into his back. He could hear the whispering start, the clucking of disapproval. The judgment that came so easily to people who had never been hungry, never been afraid, never been invisible. He did not stop. Harold was lifting his spoon now, almost at his lips. Tariq opened his mouth, but his voice cracked, caught in his throat. Panic gripped him. What if they dragged him away? What if they laughed? What if they hurt him? But worse, far worse, was the thought of doing nothing, of watching Harold eat that poisoned soup while he stayed silent. Tariq clenched his fist, drawing blood from the ragged nails biting into his palms. And then from somewhere deep inside, he found his voice. Do not eat that. The words ripped out of him raw and loud, shattering the polite atmosphere like a rock through stained glass. Every conversation died instantly. Forks clattered against plates. A waiter dropped a tray. Gasps filled the air. Harold froze. Spoon suspended mid-air. Clarissa jerked her head around, her smile snapping off like a broken mask. All eyes turned to Tariq, a boy in a dirty hoodie, a boy out of place, a boy who dared to shout inside their kingdom of manners and money. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Clarissa stood up so fast her chair screeched against the tile. What are you doing here? She demanded, voice sharp and venomous. You do not belong here. Get out! Tariq trembled, but did not move. He pointed at the bowl in Harold's hand, his arm rigid as steel. She put something in your food, Tariq said, voice shaking, but clear. I saw her. Do not eat it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A heavy silence pressed down on the patio. Harold frowned, glancing between Tariq and Clarissa. Confusion etched across his weathered face. Clarissa's mouth opened and closed, words failing her for the first time. A few waiters exchanged uncertain glances. A man at a nearby table muttered under his breath. A woman covered her mouth with a manicured hand. Still nobody moved, nobody helped. Tariq stood alone, the center of a storm. He could not see his heart pounding like a drum. Clarissa recovered first. She forced a laugh, light and tinkling, the sound of practiced innocence. That is ridiculous, she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. He is just some homeless kid trying to cause trouble. You are not going to believe him over me, are you? Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but Tariq saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. He had seen the same look before in dealers cornered by police and liars. Caught out, Harold studied her, carefully saying nothing. Tariq could feel the tension stretching tighter and tighter, like a rubber band about to snap. And he knew right here. Right now, everything depended on what Harold chose to believe. A boy in a hoodie. Or the woman he called his wife. For a long moment, no one moved. The clink of a wine glass, tipping over somewhere in the background, sounded deafening against the silence. Even the fountain outside seemed to hush, as if the whole world were holding its breath. Harold Vaughn set his spoon down, carefully, never taking his eyes off Tariq. Come here, son, he said finally, his voice low but firm. Tariq hesitated, glancing around. Every face was turned toward him now. Some filled with curiosity, some with disgust, some with something colder. A warning not to cross certain lines, but Harold's voice had weight. It cut through the fear. Tariq stepped forward slowly, each step feeling like he was dragging chains behind him. Clarissa's hand shot out, grabbing Harold's sleeve with sudden desperation. Harold, please, she said, her voice breaking into a tremor she could not fully control. He is lying. You cannot listen to someone like him. Someone like him, Tariq heard it plain as day, even if she did not say it out loud. Someone poor, someone black, someone disposable. Harold gently pried her fingers from his sleeve. Let the boy speak, he said. Clarissa flinched, then dropped back into her chair, face pale beneath her perfect makeup. Tariq stopped a few feet from Harold's table, head bowed slightly, hands fisted inside the pockets of his hoodie. I saw her, Tariq said, his voice raw. I saw her pour something into your soup. A little bottle, clear liquid. A ripple of murmurs spread across the cafe. Clarissa laughed again, brittle and sharp. This is absurd, she said, but her voice was too high, too strained. Are we seriously entertaining the ramblings of a street rat? A woman at a nearby table frowned. A man in a navy suit whispered something to his companion. The tide was turning. Harold leaned back in his chair, studying Tariq with an expression Tariq could not read. You saw this clearly, he asked. Tariq nodded. I was right there. He said, I saw everything. Harold exhaled slowly, then turned to a nearby waiter. Get me another bowl of this soup, he said, voice clipped. The waiter blinked confused but nodded and hurried away. Clarissa started to speak again, but Harold cut her off with a glance. Minutes dragged by like hours. When the new bowl of soup arrived, Harold set it carefully beside the old one. He looked at Tariq. Which one did she touch? Tariq pointed without hesitation. That one, he said. The old bowl, Harold nodded once, then gestured for another waiter. Call the manager, he said, and call the police. Clarissa stiffened in her seat. No, she gasped. Harold, this is ridiculous. You are going to ruin everything over a nobody. Her voice cracked on the last word. Harold did not answer her. He simply sat there, his face carved in stone, waiting. It did not take long. The manager arrived, first flustered and sweating. Then two police officers, crisp in navy uniforms, entered the patio, scanning the scene with sharp professional eyes. Clarissa rose from her seat, hands raised as if to shield herself. "It is all a misunderstanding," she said quickly. I am his wife. This boy is lying. He just wants attention. Money." The officers listened politely. Then one of them turned to Harold. "Sir, would you like to make a formal complaint?" Harold nodded once. "Test the soup," he said simply, "and talk to the boy." The officer beckoned Tariq over gently. Tariq told his story again, every detail, every movement he had seen. This time there was no hesitation in his voice, no trembling. He had stepped out of the shadows, and he was not going back. The officers took notes, called for a forensics team. Clarissa sat back down heavily, her face crumbling, mascara smudging under her eyes. It was over. The weight of lies, of appearances, of all the pretty little deceptions she had built. It all came crashing down, and all it took was a boy in a battered hoodie. The cafe buzzed again, but the energy had shifted. Where once Tariq had been invisible, now everyone saw him. They saw the courage it took to stand up. They saw the quiet strength wrapped inside that worn hoodie. As the officers led Clarissa away, Harold stood and walked toward Tariq. He stopped in front of him, reaching into the pocket of his tailored jacket. Tariq flinched instinctively, but Harold only pulled out a crisp business card. He pressed it into Tariq's hand. "If you ever need anything," Harold said quietly, "you come find me." Tariq stared down at the card, the expensive paper heavy between his fingers. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen him, really seen him, not as a problem, not as a nuisance, but as a person. Harold nodded once, then turned back toward his table. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the patio. Tariq stood still for a long moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over him. He pulled up the hood of his sweatshirt, tucked the card carefully into his pocket, and walked away. Not because he was afraid, not because he was invisible, but because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away knowing you made a difference. Tariq did not become a hero that day. Not really. By the time the whispers about him floated through the city, from coffee shops to boardrooms, the story was already broken. Some called him the brave homeless kid who saved a billionaire. Some said he was a street rat who just got lucky, and most forgot him the very next day. That was how it always worked. People loved their heroes fast and left them even faster. Tariq stayed the same. Same battered hoodie pulled tight over his head. Same cracked sneakers slapping against uneven sidewalks. Same thin frame slipping through alleys and empty lots where no one cared if you lived or died. He thought maybe things would go back to normal. He thought wrong. It started slow. A woman at the corner store stared too long when he walked in, clutching her purse tighter. Security guards began following him through the grocery aisles. At the library, where he sometimes went just to feel warm, the old man at the front desk narrowed his eyes and whispered into a phone whenever Tariq showed up. It was like a sickness spreading through the city. Suspicion he was not invisible anymore. But being seen was not what he imagined. Being seen meant being marked. Every step he took, he could feel it, like a hand pressed against the back of his neck. One wrong move, and they would shove him right back into the shadows where he belonged. He learned to walk faster, to look smaller, to keep moving. Still, trouble has a way of finding you when you least want it. One gray afternoon, Tariq wandered into Grant Park, a cracked slice of green squeezed between the glint of glass office towers. It was not much a playground, missing half its swings, a dry fountain filled with cigarette butts. Graffiti scrawled across the battered basketball court, but it was quiet. And for a boy like Tariq, quiet was gold. He dropped his backpack on a sun-warmed bench and flopped down beside it, arms stretched wide, letting the last weak light of day soak into his skin. For once, no one yelled, no one stared, no one cared. For once, he could just exist, but peace never lasted. Footsteps crunched against the gravel path. Tariq opened his eyes lazily, pretending not to notice. Three boys stood near the playground entrance. Teenagers, probably 16 or 17. Baggy jeans, oversized jackets, cheap sneakers, hoods pulled low, hands stuffed deep in their pockets. Tariq knew the look. Not rich kids, not gangbangers, just kids looking for someone to hurt. The biggest one, a heavy-set boy with a torn red hoodie, elbowed the boy next to him and nodded in Tariq's direction. "That's him," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "That's the little punk from the news." Tariq stiffened, heart pounding once, twice hard against his ribs. He kept his eyes half closed, kept his body loose like he had not heard. Sometimes if you made yourself small enough, invisible enough, the wolves would pass you by, sometimes, but not today. The boy swaggered closer, boots scuffing against the cracked sidewalk. Tariq stayed still. Red Hoodie stopped just a few feet away, arms crossed. "You think you're better than us now," he sneered. Tariq said nothing. "You think you're famous or something," chipped-toothed boy chimed in, laughing. Tariq stayed silent, hands tucked deep inside his hoodie pockets. Inside his body screamed a move to run, but he knew better. Running would only make it worse, worry boy. The third one started circling him slowly, like a jackal sizing up a wounded animal. "You saved a rich man," he said, voice sharp with mockery. "That make you one of them now. You think they're gonna save you?" Tariq lifted his head slightly, looking the boy straight in the eye. No fear, no challenge, just steel. It was enough to make the wiry boy falter for half a second before masking it with a snort. Tariq knew how this game worked. It was not about money. It was not even about fame. It was about the story they needed him to be less. To remind themselves they were not the ones left behind. They needed him to break. To fall, Tariq stayed still. He did not flinch when Red Hoodie stepped closer, did not blink when the boy's shadow fell over him. In the corner of his mind, he replayed the lessons life had taught him. Fast feet, quicker words, quicker instincts. But today he did none of that. Today he chose to hold his ground, because sometimes survival was not about running. Sometimes survival was about refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing you afraid. The boys circled closer. Their shadows stretched across the cracked concrete like long fingers reaching for him. Tariq stayed rooted to the bench, his breath slow and steady, his hoodie casting a dark shadow across his face. The silence between them twisted tighter. Red Hoodie took the lead, of course. There was always one. Always the one who needed it more, needed to prove something. "You think you're better 'cause you on TV," Red Hoodie sneered, stepping into Tariq's space, his sneakers almost touching Tariq's battered shoes. "You think they're gonna let you sit at their tables, live in their houses?" He leaned closer, the smell of cheap cigarettes and anger rolling off him in waves. "They ain't ever gonna want you," Red Hoodie whispered. "Not people like you?" Tariq blinked slowly. He knew he had always known. The world did not need another reminder. The worry boy behind him kicked at Tariq's backpack, sending it sliding across the concrete. The worn canvas bag thudded against the base of the fountain, spilling a few crumpled papers and an old cracked phone onto the ground. The boys laughed harsh and bright against the dull gray sky. Tariq said nothing. He did not move. The chip-toothed boy nudged Red Hoodie with his elbow, grinning. "Manny ain't even gonna fight back," he said. Pathetic, wiry boy added, kicking at a loose rock and sending it skittering past Tariq's feet. The laughter echoed through the empty park, filling the spaces between the broken swings and cracked pavement. Tariq let it roll over him, let it wash past, because he knew something they didn't. Silence was not weakness, it was control. It was a choice. Still, he felt the burn behind his eyes, not from fear, from anger. From the familiar, exhausting ache of always having to prove you belonged, just to breathe. The boys were getting bored. Predators liked easy victories. When the prey refused to dance, it took the fun out of it. Red Hoodie stepped back, crossing his arms. "You ain't no hero," he said loud enough to carry across the park. "You just lucky." Tarek looked up at him, finally really looked. And in that moment, Tariq smiled. It was small, it was tired, but it was real. It was the smile of someone who had walked through worse fires than these boys could ever imagine, and survived. The smile made Red Hoodie flinch just a little, like a punch he had not seen coming. The chip-toothed boy scowled. "Whatever, man," he muttered, backing away. "Let's bounce, wiry boy," added, shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. The three of them retreated, their swagger deflating slightly as they moved toward the broken fence at the edge of the park. Still trying to act like they had won something. Still trying to convince themselves. Tariq watched them go, the wind tugging at the frayed edges of his hoodie. He waited until they were just specks on the horizon before he stood, slowly stretching the stiffness from his muscles. His backpack lay abandoned by the fountain. He walked over, picking it up carefully, brushing the dust off with slow, deliberate hands. Inside the bag, nothing important had broken, just scraps. Just pieces of a life no one cared about. He stuffed the papers back inside, zipped it shut, and slung it over his shoulder. The sky above had shifted, the light colder now, the clouds gathering thick and low. Tariq pulled his hoodie tighter against the creeping chill. He started walking toward the far side of the park, where the trees thinned out into cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, not even because of sadness, but because he understood something very clearly. Now saving one man's life had not changed his own. It had only painted a bigger target on his back. The world did not reward boys like him for being brave. It punished them for daring to step out of line. Still as he walked, Tariq did not regret what he had done. Not for a second, because courage was not a transaction. You did not do the right thing because you expected applause. You did it because it was right. And even if the world wanted to beat that out of him, Tariq would not let them. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The first strike had come. It would not be the last, but he was ready now, ready to stand his ground, ready to wear his battered hoodie like armor, ready to face whatever came next, even if he had to do it alone. Especially if he had to do it alone. Because sometimes being invisible was a weapon all its own, and sometimes the quietest kids in the crowd carried the loudest truths in their bones. Tariq walked on the city, swallowing him whole, but he did not disappear. Not really, he was still there, tucked between the cracks. The spaces no one thought to look. Waiting, watching, enduring. Because his story was not over. Not even close. The days that followed felt heavier. Tariq could feel it every time he stepped onto a new street, every time he ducked into a corner store, every time he sat too long in one place. People whispered, some pointed, a few just stared with the same hollow look he had seen his whole life, a mixture of fear, suspicion, and pity. But now there was something new woven into it. Expectation, like they were waiting for him to slip up, waiting for him to prove them right, waiting for the story they had already written for him to come true. Hero, criminal, tragedy, they did not care which. As long as he played the part, Tariq kept his head down, hoodie up steps, quick and steady. The city felt colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. Even the sun seemed different, pale and washed out, barely warming the sidewalks he walked. One afternoon, he found himself back near Willow Garden Cafe, not close enough to be noticed. Just across the street, tucked behind a rusted lamppost. He watched the beautiful people laugh and sip their coffee, their lives untouched, unchanged. It was like nothing had ever happened. The billionaire still sat at his favorite table, surrounded by a different crowd. Now lawyers, assistants, bodyguards. No sign of Clarissa. No mention of Tariq. No space for him in their golden world. He was not surprised. He had never expected a parade or a medal. He just thought, maybe someone would remember. Maybe someone would care. But the city moved on, and Tariq had learned how to move with it. He turned away from the cafe, pulling his hoodie tighter, and slipped back into the flow of forgotten faces. Later that week, the second strike came. He was walking through an alley shortcut he had used 1,000 times before a narrow passage squeezed between two old apartment buildings. The walls were tagged with graffiti layers on top of layers like the city trying to cover its own scars. The ground was littered with broken bottles and discarded fast food bags. He should have seen the signs. The silence that was too heavy, the air that felt too still. But he was tired, tired of running, tired of watching, tired of being ready for war every time he took a breath. So when the first blow came, he barely had time to brace. A shove from behind sent him sprawling against the brick wall, the rough surface tearing at his hoodie. He stumbled, turning instinctively, fists half raised. It was not the boys from the park. These were older three men, maybe late teens or early 20s. Hoods pulled, low faces blurred with anger and something sharp or jealousy. One of them, a tall guy with a scar along his jawline, stepped forward. "You think you're somebody." "Now," he snarled. Tariq said nothing. "You think saving some rich dude makes you better than us?" The second man laughed a cruel, hollow sound. "He probably thinks he's going to be famous. Get a movie deal or some shh." The third just cracked his knuckles, grinning like he was waiting for an excuse. Tariq kept his back to the wall, eyes darting between them, body tense. He knew how fast these things could go wrong. One wrong word, one wrong move, one excuse, and it would not just be a black eye this time. It would be worse. Much worse. Scarface stepped closer, close enough that Tariq could see the wildness in his eyes. "You embarrassed the wrong people, kid," he hissed. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Tariq exhaled slowly. He could taste the metal in the air, the promise of violence, sharp and cold. He could feel the trap closing. But even now, even with fear coiling in his gut, he did not flinch, because some part of him understood the truth. This was not about him. It had never been about him. It was about the idea of him, a black boy in a hoodie who dared to stand up, who dared to be seen, who dared to survive. That was the real threat. That was what they could not allow. Scarface shoved him hard again, slamming him against the wall. The others moved closer. Tariq braced for the blows. But before the first fist could land, a door swung open at the far end of the alley. A wiry old man with a cigarette dangling from his lips stepped out carrying a trash bag. He froze, taking in the scene. Tariq, three men closing in. The heat crackling in the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the old man spat out his cigarette and barked, "Police right around the corner. Boys' cameras too. You want to end up on the news." The men hesitated, glanced at each other, cursed under their breath. And then just like that, they scattered, melting into the maze of alleyways, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Tariq slid down the wall, heart hammering against his ribs. The old man gave him a long, measuring look, then shrugged. "Keep your head down, kid," he muttered. Then he turned and disappeared into the building door, slamming shut behind him. Tariq sat there for a long moment, the world spinning around him. Then slowly he got up, adjusted his torn hoodie, picked up his bag, and kept walking. Because that was all he knew how to do. Keep walking, keep surviving. No matter how many strikes came, the city had a way of grinding you down. It did not happen all at once. Not with a scream, not with a gunshot, not with a sudden fall. It was slower, quieter, a steady grinding erosion of your soul. Tariq felt it more each day now. He felt it in the way strangers crossed the street when they saw him coming. He felt it when cashiers followed him with their eyes while pretending to smile. He felt it in the tight nods from bus drivers, the extra second of hesitation before opening the doors. He was a symbol now. Not a boy, not a human being, just a warning, a lesson whispered under breaths. This is what happens when you step out of line. One morning, the lesson became louder. It happened at Roosevelt High, a place Tariq had avoided for years, because he did not need a classroom to know how the world worked. But hunger does not care about pride. The community center near Roosevelt had a free breakfast program, powdered eggs, cheap toast, watery orange juice. It was not much, but it was enough. Tariq slipped into the school courtyard just after sunrise. Hoodie pulled low, head down. He moved through the milling students like a ghost, unnoticed and unwanted. Until he wasn't. A voice rang out across the courtyard, sharp and ugly. Hey, look who decided to show his face. Tariq froze. Slowly he turned. A group of seniors stood near the vending machines, laughing too loudly, their faces twisted into grins that held no humor. At the front was Connor Blake, captain of the basketball team, golden boy of Roosevelt High, blonde, broad-shouldered, everything the city loved to put on a pedestal. And standing next to Connor, clutching a phone already recording, was Malik Jones, someone Tariq had once called a friend. Long ago, before survival made enemies out of everybody. Connor sauntered toward him, each step deliberate, confident, the swagger of someone who had never been told no. The crowd thickened, students drawn by the scent of fresh humiliation. Tariq stood his ground, backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie shadowing his face. Connor stopped a few feet away, tilting his head mockingly. Thought you were too good for places like this? Now, he said, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry across the courtyard. The crowd chuckled. Phones came out, screens flashed to life. Fingers hovered over record buttons. Tariq said nothing. Connor grinned wider. What's the matter, hero, he jeered. Too busy saving rich white folks to hang with your own people now. The words sliced deep. Deeper than the shoves and punches ever could. Tariq felt his hands clench inside the pockets of his hoodie. Felt the fire climb up his throat, begging to be unleashed. But he swallowed it down. Because he knew if he swung first, he would be the villain. If he spoke first, he would be the thug. It was a script written long before he was born. Connor leaned in closer voice, dropping to a venomous whisper. You ain't no hero, he said. You just a mascot, a good little story they can tell themselves. He punctuated the words with a shove to Tariq's shoulder, hard enough to stagger him backward. The crowd whooped and hollered, the noise swelling like a wave. Tariq caught himself, boots skidding on the cracked concrete. He straightened slowly, adjusted the strap of his backpack, and stared Connor dead in the eye. Not with anger, not with fear, with something worse. Pity? For a second, just a second, Connor's smile faltered. But Malik stepped forward, shoving his phone into Tariq's face. Smile for the camera, hoodie boy, Malik sneered. Let's see what a real hero looks like. The words echoed through the courtyard. Hoodie boy, that was what they saw. Not Tariq, not a kid trying to survive. Not someone who had saved a life. Just a hoodie, just another target. Laughter rolled over him, thick and sticky. Tariq stood there, letting the wave break over him, letting the cameras roll. He did not speak. He did not fight. He simply endured. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is survive the moment without letting it change who you are. Even when the whole world is watching, even when the whole world wants you to break, especially then, the first real blow had landed. And it was not a fist. It was something much harder to heal. It was shame. Manufactured, filmed, uploaded, shared. But Tariq stayed standing. Because survival was not about winning every fight. It was about refusing to let them turn you into something you were not. And Tariq Evans, battered hoodie, empty pockets, and all was still standing. The video hit the internet before Tariq even made it out of the courtyard. By the time he ducked through the back gate and disappeared into the side streets, it was already happening. Comments piling up, shares multiplying, laughter spreading like a wildfire he could not outrun. Tariq did not need to see the screen to know what it said. He had lived long enough to know how the world wrote boys like him into their stories. The captions would be simple. Hoodie boy gets put in his place. Wannabe hero exposed from street rat to laughingstock. It did not matter that he had done the right thing. It did not matter that he had saved a man's life. The world was not looking for truth. The world was looking for entertainment. And Tariq, whether he liked it or not, was the show. He kept walking. Kept moving through the maze of cracked sidewalks and graffiti-scarred alleys. Everywhere he went, it felt like the eyes followed him now. In the laundromat, a woman nudged her son away from Tariq with a tight smile. At the gas station, the clerk narrowed his eyes and tapped a finger against the counter when Tariq lingered too long near the candy rack. No words, just looks, just judgment. It was louder than any shout, worse than any slap. Tariq felt it settle into his bones like cold rain. He wanted to disappear, wanted to pull his hoodie up so high that no one could ever see him again, wanted to fold into himself and vanish into the cracks of the city that had never truly wanted him anyway. But he didn't, because some part of him, some small, stubborn part, refused to give them the satisfaction, refused to let them decide who he was. Still, pride did not feed you. Pride did not warm you at night. Pride did not stop the world from grinding you into dust. The days blurred together. He stopped going to the community center for breakfast. Too many stares, too many whispers. He stopped sitting near parks. Too many kids with cameras. Too many phones pointed at him like loaded guns. Even the alleyways began to feel too narrow, too full of shadows that moved when you turned your back. One night the rain came down hard. Cold needles stabbing through the holes in his hoodie, soaking him to the skin. He found shelter under the crumbling awning of an abandoned liquor store, huddling against the wall, hugging his knees to his chest. He could hear the city breathing around him, the low rumble of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the occasional shout that cracked the night open like thunder. And somewhere deep inside it, all the buzz of a phone vibrating in someone's hand. A video still spreading. Still laughing, Tariq buried his face in his arms. For the first time since the cafe, the first time since he had stood up and shouted for a man he did not even know. He felt the weight of it crush down on him. He felt small. He felt stupid. He felt alone. The rain blurred the city lights into a smear of gold and red and blue. He sat there shivering, soaked a boy in a hoodie that smelled like damp earth and old dreams. And he asked himself the question that every fighter asks eventually, was it worth it? Standing up, speaking out, risking everything for people who would rather laugh at you than listen. Was it worth it? Tariq did not have the answer. Not that night, not in the rain, not when every breath felt like it scraped against the inside of his ribs, but somewhere deep down beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, beneath the cold, something still burned, a small, stubborn ember. It was not hope. Not yet. Hope was too big, too bright. This was smaller, older. The thing that had kept boys like him alive long before there were cameras, long before there were headlines, long before there was even a word for it. Defiance, not loud, not violent, not flashy, just refusal. Refusal to be erased, refusal to be rewritten, refusal to be anything less than whole. Tariq lifted his head slowly, feeling the rain run in cold rivers down his face. He pulled his hoodie tighter, wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, and he whispered into the wet, heavy air, I am still here. It was not much. It was barely a sound at all, but it was real and it was enough for now. The city would not remember him tomorrow. The internet would find new things to laugh at. The world would keep spinning, chewing up kids like him and spitting them out. But Tariq Evans' hoodie-soaked, heart-bruised body, battered soul worn thin, he would still be standing. And sometimes just standing was the bravest thing you could do. Morning came gray and heavy, dragging itself across the city like a tired giant. Tariq woke curled against the wall of the abandoned store, the cold leaching into his bones. His clothes were stiff from the rain. His body ached in places he had forgotten existed. But he was awake. He was still breathing. Still here. He pulled himself upright slowly, shoulders stiff, muscles sore. The street stretched out in front of him empty, except for a few early commuters hurrying past with their heads down umbrellas, bobbing like dark flowers. No one looked at him. No one asked if he was okay. The world spun on. Tariq tucked his hands deep into the pocket of his hoodie and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the cold, not even because of the hunger gnawing at his gut, but because he knew what was waiting for him. He knew the video was still out there, still spreading, still laughing. The walk to the library, his one safe place, felt longer than usual. He kept his head low, hoodie pulled tight, trying to become part of the sidewalk itself. But whispers still caught him like hooks as he passed. That's him. That's the hoodie kid. He thinks he is something special. Each word hit like a pebble against his ribs. Small but relentless. At the library, he hesitated outside the glass doors. Inside, warm light spilled across the carpet. The smell of old books and burnt coffee floated into the damp morning air. It should have felt like safety. Instead, it felt like a test. He pushed the door open. Heads turned immediately. Nine, not all of them, but enough. A woman at the front desk stiffened slightly, her hand pausing midair over the checkout scanner. A teenager in a hoodie not so different from Tariq's brand new Spotless nudged his friend and snickered. Tariq felt the heat creep up his neck. He forced his feet to move forward, step by step, one aisle at a time. He made his way to the back of the building, to the dusty corner near the old reference books where no one ever bothered him. He slid down into the carpet backpack tucked against his chest like a shield. And for a while he just sat there, eyes closed, letting the silence settle around him. It was not perfect. It was not peace. Isikinon. But it was something, until it wasn't. A sharp voice cracked the quiet. Library's not a homeless shelter, kid. Tariq opened his eyes. The security guard knew. Not the regular one stood over him, arms crossed, mouth twisted in a sneer. You got somewhere to be, right, the guard said, because you can't be here. Tariq's heart pounded. He had done nothing. He had said nothing. He was just sitting, existing. But existing for kids like him was often seen as a threat. He stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. I am just reading, he said, voice low. The guard shook his head. Not today, you're not. He jerked a thumb toward the door. Move it. Around them, eyes peeked over computer screens and around bookcases. Some curious, some disgusted, most indifferent. Tariq felt every single one of them press against his skin like needles. He could argue. He makes us theory. He could shout. He could demand to be treated like a human being. But he knew how that would end. Another video, another headline, another story twisted into something he could never outrun. So he picked up his backpack, pulled his hoodie tighter, and walked out. Again, out into the cold, out into the noise, out into a world that had decided who he was without ever bothering to ask. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment he just stood there staring at his reflection in the glass. The hoodie, the tired eyes, the slumped shoulders. He did not look like a hero. He looked like every warning sign they had ever been taught to fear. But Tariq knew better. He knew what they refused to see. The real danger was never the boy in the hoodie. The real danger was a world that could see someone risk everything to save a life and still call him less than human. Tariq turned away from the glass. He walked into the morning traffic, the city buzzing and growling around him. Cars honked, voices shouted, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. He moved through it all like smoke, untouchable, invisible. But alive, still fighting, even if the fight was silent, even if the only weapon he had left was the simple, stubborn act of existing. Tariq Evans, the boy in the battered hoodie, would not be erased. Not by laughter, not by cameras, not by the heavy hands pushing him down. He was still here, still standing, still moving forward. And sometimes that was the loudest story of all. Some battles happen, loud fists flying, voices raised, sirens screaming. Others happen quietly, like a knife slipped between ribs in the middle of a crowd. Tariq was about to learn that the quiet ones cut the deepest. It started with a flyer. He found it taped to the light pole outside the laundromat, where he sometimes washed his few clothes. The paper flapped in the cold breeze, water-streaked but still readable. Big black letters. A blurry picture underneath his picture. A shot pulled from the viral video, Tariq mid-stumble, mid-shove, arms flailing as the crowd laughed. The headline screamed, "Local hoodie boy dangerous. Unstable, stay alert." Tariq stared at it for a long moment. The words blurring together, dangerous, unstable, stay alert. It was almost funny. Almost if it had not been about him. If it had not been his face twisted in fear, frozen forever, pinned there for the whole world to spit on. Someone had crossed a line. Someone had decided that humiliating him on a schoolyard was not enough. They wanted more. They wanted him feared. They wanted him hated. Tariq reached out, fingers trembling, and ripped the flyer down. But two more flapped nearby, stapled to the bus stop, pasted against the chain-link fence of the playground. His face, his name, his shame, everywhere. He stuffed the torn paper into his backpack, heart hammering against his ribs. People were staring now. A woman pulling a toddler along by the hand. A man smoking near the corner. His eyes narrow, calculating. Tariq pulled his hoodie up higher and walked away fast, head down, footsteps quick. But no matter how fast he moved, he could not outrun it. It followed him. At the corner store, the clerk watched him like a hawk. At the park, parents pulled their kids closer when he passed. On the bus, an old man muttered something under his breath and shifted seats, leaving a wide empty space around Tariq, like he was contagious. The message was clear. You are not safe. You are not welcome. You do not belong. And worst of all, the city was starting to believe it. It was not just kids with cameras now. It was grown men, mothers, teachers, strangers, people who had never met him, people who knew nothing about what he had done or who he really was. They had been told a story, and it was easier to believe the story than to question it. Easier to see a hoodie than a human being. By the time night fell, Tariq was shaking with rage and fear, and something worse, helplessness. He found himself back at the alley behind Willow Garden Cafe, the place where all of this had started. It was almost empty now. Only a few kitchen workers lingering by the dumpsters, smoking and laughing in a different language. Tariq sank down against the graffiti-stained wall, pulling his knees up to his chest. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting harsh, yellow pools on the cracked pavement. He pulled the torn flyer out of his bag, smoothing it with trembling hands. He stared at his own face. Frozen mid-fall. Frozen mid-failure. He hated it. Hated the way they had twisted his story. Hated the way they had stolen his voice. And most of all, he hated how much it hurt. Because deep down, no matter how many times he told himself it didn't matter. It did. He wanted to be seen. Really seen, not as a threat, not as a joke, not as a story whispered behind cupped hands. As a person, Tariq crumpled the flyer into a tight ball and threw it against the wall. It bounced once, landing in a puddle. He stared at it for a long moment, breathing hard, chest aching. In the distance, the city buzzed and howled, uncaring, unmoved, but Tariq was changing. The line had been crossed. And once you crossed it, once you tried to erase a person completely, you left them with nothing left to lose, nothing left to fear, only the raw burning need to fight back. Tariq did not know how, yet did not know what that fight would look like. But he knew this. He would not disappear. He would not crumble. They could smear his name. They could spread their lies. They could turn every alley and street corner into a battlefield. It did not matter, he was still here, still breathing, still burning. And sometimes a boy with nothing left was the most dangerous thing in the world, especially when all he had to lose was already gone. The next morning it got worse. Tariq woke early, muscles stiff from sleeping against concrete. The world outside still dark, except for the dull orange glow of distant streetlights. He sat up slowly, hoodie damp from the night air, backpack clutched against his chest. Another day, another battle. He dusted himself off and started walking. His stomach growled with hunger, but he ignored it. He had bigger problems. As he passed the corner of 9th and Jefferson, his heart stopped. Spray painted across the side of an old brick building, in giant red letters, was a message. A message for him. Hoodie boy. Criminal. Below it, someone had drawn a crude stick figure. A boy in a hoodie, hands raised in surrender, surrounded by flashing police lights. Tariq stared at it, fists clenched tight at his sides. It was not just a flyer anymore. Not just whispers. It was painted across the city now. Permanent, loud, undeniable. The world had made its decision. He was the villain. He was the threat. He was the story they wanted to tell. He looked around, half expecting to see someone laughing from the shadows, recording his reaction. But the street was empty, silent, like the city itself was watching. He turned away, hoodie pulled low, and kept walking. He did not know where he was going. He just knew he could not stay still. Not here. Not now. The alleys and back streets that used to feel like safety, nets, now felt like traps. Every doorway, every window, every shadow seemed ready to spring. Paranoia gnawed at him. Were they following him? Were they planning something worse? He ducked into an abandoned parking garage, breathing hard, heart hammering against his ribs. He slid down against a concrete pillar, pulling his backpack tight to his chest, listening. The city hummed and groaned around him, but he heard no footsteps, no voices. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was being hunted, and maybe he was. Not with guns, not with fists, with stories, with lies, with fear. The kind of fear that made people cross the street. The kind of fear that made cops reach for their belts. The kind of fear that got kids like him hurt or worse. He leaned his head back against the pillar, staring up at the crumbling ceiling above. It would be so easy to give in, to let the weight crush him, to disappear like they wanted. But even as the thought crossed his mind, something in him rebelled. Something sharp and stubborn and burning. They wanted him erased. They wanted him silent. They wanted him broken. No, not today, not ever. He would not let them rewrite who he was. He would not let them steal his story. Even if the whole world turned against him, he still had the truth. And sometimes truth was the only weapon you needed. Tariq stood up slowly, brushing the dust from his jeans. His legs trembled, but he stayed on his feet. He was not done. Not yet. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and stepped out of the garage into the morning light. The city was waking up around him. Cars grumbled down the streets. Vendors opened their carts. Kids dragged backpacks behind them on their way to school. Life moved on. It always did. Tariq moved with it, slipping into the flow like a ghost. At a bus stop, he caught sight of another flyer stapled to the pole. Another warning, another lie. He ripped it down without breaking stride. At a corner market, he saw a man pointing at him, whispering to a woman beside him. He kept walking. Near the library, a group of teenagers jeered as he passed. He kept walking. Because that was the thing they never understood. They could smear him, mock him, chase him, but they could not make him stop moving. Every step was defiance. Every breath was resistance. Every heartbeat was proof that he was still here, still fighting, still refusing to vanish. By the time he reached the boarded-up lot near 12th and Vine, the sun was high and hot against his back. He ducked into the shade of a half-collapsed building, heart still pounding, but steadier now. He leaned against the wall, breathing deep, alive, still standing. And somewhere deep inside, the ember flared brighter, because Tariq was beginning to understand something important. They had crossed the line first. They had drawn first blood. And that meant he no longer had to play by their rules. He could write his own story now, his own ending. No matter how many lies they stacked against him, no matter how many walls they tried to build between him and the world, he would not stay behind them. He would climb them, tear them down, burn them to the ground if he had to, because he was not just surviving anymore. He was preparing. The city had declared war on a boy in a hoodie, and they had no idea what they had started. That night, the city breathed a different kind of air. It was thicker, tighter, like the whole place knew something was about to crack. Tariq felt it in his bones as he moved through the streets. Every glance that lingered too long, every whisper that stopped when he passed, every shutter that snapped closed a little faster than it needed to. They were not just watching him anymore. They were waiting for him to fall. He could see it in their faces, waiting for him to lash out, waiting for him to prove their stories true. He had a choice. He could give them what they wanted, or he could give them something they would never expect. Strength, restraint, power in silence. But silence did not mean surrender. Not this time. As night fell, Tariq found himself standing outside the courthouse downtown. The massive stone building loomed above him, cold and unfeeling. Its steps had seen protests, celebrations, and defeats. Now they would see something else. A beginning. He took a deep breath and crossed the street, his sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. He climbed the steps slowly, feeling the weight of the city pressing against his back. At the top, he stood before the doors, heavy clothes guarded by statues carved to look wise and merciful. Tariq knew better. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled but clean. On it, in sharp black letters, he had written 4 simple words. "I am not dangerous." He taped it to the door. A small act, almost laughably small, but it was a line in the sand, a refusal, a declaration. Someone inside must have noticed, because within minutes a security guard stepped out frowning. "You cannot put that there, kid," the guard said, his voice tired but not cruel. Tariq nodded. He peeled the paper down without a word. But before he turned to leave, he looked the guard in the eye. Really looked. And for the first time in days, he saw something different staring back at him. Not fear, not disgust, confusion, maybe even doubt. It was small, tiny, but it was there. And that was enough. He stepped back into the night, the city swallowing him once again. But he was not running anymore. He was moving, purposeful, alive. The next morning, more signs appeared, not from Tariq, from others. Scraps of paper taped to streetlights and bus stops and alley walls. He saved a life. See the boy, not the hoodie. Tariq matters. At first, it was just 1 or 2 anonymous quiet. But by noon, there were dozens, and by evening, hundreds. Someone had seen him. Someone had heard his silent scream. And they answered, not with speeches, not with marches, but with the simplest, most powerful thing of all, truth. Tariq saw one of the signs taped to the bus shelter on 14th Street. He stared at it for a long time, the crowd moving around him like a river. He traced the letters with his eyes, feeling something inside him crack open and pour out something warm, something fierce. He was not alone. Not completely. Not anymore. The city had tried to erase him, had painted him as a threat, had buried him under lies. But here he was, still standing, still fighting, still writing his own story, one breath at a time. He pulled his hoodie tighter against the chill and turned toward the setting sun, its red light burning through the cracks in the skyline. Behind him, the city buzzed and muttered. Ahead of him, The streets stretched wide and waiting. Tariq walked forward, step by step. One boy, one hoodie, one story they could not silence, no matter how hard they tried, no matter how loud they screamed, because the line had been crossed, and now it was their turn to be afraid. The city thought it had Tariq cornered, thought it had squeezed him into a box so small, so tight, he would finally disappear. But what they forgot, what they never even bothered to ask, was who Tariq really was and where he came from. They never wondered who had taught him to stand silent in the face of anger, who had taught him to take a hit and still keep walking, who had taught him that survival was not about strength, but about patience. Tariq had not learned those lessons alone. There was a man behind the boy in the hoodie, a shadow moving quietly through the city. And now that shadow was waking up. It started late one night as Tariq huddled in the abandoned lot near Vine Street, trying to sleep beneath a broken billboard. The air smelled of rain and burnt rubber. His body ached from cold and hunger, but his mind stayed alert, nerves twitching at every distant siren, every sudden footstep. He heard the car before he saw it. A low, deep rumble, not the sharp whine of a taxi or the growl of a city bus. Something heavier, older. Tariq lifted his head, heart thudding. At the edge of the lot, headlights cut through the dark like knives. A black car, long, wide, silent, except for the hum of the engine. The windows were tinted so dark they looked painted. The car rolled to a stop, engine idling low. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's side door opened with a soft click, and a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple dark coat and worn boots that crunched softly against the gravel. His face was hard to see in the gloom, but his presence filled the air like a storm rolling in Tariq's muscles, coiled instinctively, ready to run. But something stopped him. Something in the way. The man moved slow, deliberate, unafraid. The man walked forward, stopping a few feet away. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Two shadows in the night. Then the man spoke, voice low and rough, like gravel under tires. "You've been making noise, kid." Tariq tensed, fists clenching in his hoodie pockets. He said nothing. The man chuckled, not unkindly. "Good noise," he added. "Real noise." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out between two fingers. Tariq hesitated, then slowly he reached out and took it, unfolded it. It was one of the signs, the ones that had started popping up across the city. The ones that said things like "Tariq matters" and "See the boy, not the hoodie." Tariq looked up confused. The man smiled, a small, tight thing that barely touched his eyes. "You got people watching your back now," the man said. "Even if you don't see 'em yet." Tariq frowned. "Who are you?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. The man shrugged. "Call me Isaac," he said simply. No last name. No explanation. Just Isaac. Tariq opened his mouth to ask more, but Isaac lifted a hand. "Not here," he said, glancing around the lot. "Too many eyes, too many ears." He gestured toward the car. "You hungry?" Tariq hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution, but his stomach, hollow and burning, screamed louder. And something in Isaac's stance, solid, unshakable, told him this man was not here to hurt him. Tariq nodded once Isaac smiled again, a little wider this time. "Come on then, hoodie boy," he said with a wink. "Let's get you something that doesn't come out of a dumpster." Tariq slung his backpack over his shoulder and followed Isaac toward the car. The door opened with a soft groan, and Tariq slid into the back seat. It smelled of old leather and engine oil, comforting in a strange, forgotten way. Isaac climbed behind the wheel, the engine rumbling to life beneath them. They pulled away from the lot, swallowed by the city's endless maze of lights and shadows. Tariq leaned his head against the cool window glass, watching the streets blur past. For the first time in what felt like forever, he let himself breathe. Not safe, not yet, but maybe not alone anymore. And somewhere deep in the marrow of his bones, a new thought stirred. Maybe survival was not the only thing he was meant for. Maybe he was meant to fight back. And if that was true, then he was going to need help. Real help. The kind of help that moved in shadows. The kind of help that understood what it meant to be hunted. The kind of help that knew the difference between surviving and winning. Isaac said nothing as they drove. He didn't have to. Tariq understood. The city had made its move. Now it was his turn, and he would not be fighting alone. Not anymore. The car moved deeper into the city, slipping through side streets and forgotten alleys like a ghost. Tariq stayed silent in the back seat, backpack pressed against his chest. Eyes flickering between the neon-lit windows and darkened doorways they passed. He did not ask where they were going. He did not have to. He trusted the silence between him and Isaac more than he trusted the noise of the streets outside. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably just minutes, they pulled into a parking lot behind a rundown diner. The neon sign buzzed overhead. Half the letters burned out, so it simply read, Din. Isaac cut the engine and looked over his shoulder. "You comin'?" Tariq hesitated. Every muscle in his body told him to run, to keep moving, to stay invisible. But something stronger pulled him forward. Trust, not blind, not foolish. Earned. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the heavy night air. Isaac led the way, pushing through the diner's battered door. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. A few tired-looking people sat slumped over booths, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of old television, screens mounted in the corners. Nobody looked up. Nobody cared. Perfect. Isaac slid into a booth near the back, gesturing for Tariq to sit opposite. A waitress shuffled over, barely glancing at them. Isaac ordered 2 coffees and 2 plates of whatever was cheapest. When she left, he turned his attention fully to Tariq. So Isaac said, voice low, steady, "You want to tell me why a city this big is so afraid of a kid in a hoodie?" Tariq shrugged, uncomfortable. He hated talking about it, hated giving life to the ugliness by speaking it out loud. But Isaac waited, patient, unmoving. Tariq stared at the cracked vinyl of the booth seat, picking at a loose thread. "They think I don't belong," he muttered finally. Isaac chuckled, a deep rumble from somewhere low in his chest. "They're right," he said. Tariq stiffened, anger flashing behind his eyes. Isaac held up a hand, calming. "You don't belong in their boxes, kid," he said. "You don't fit their lies. You don't fit their fear. And that scares the hell out of them." Tariq blinked. Nobody had ever said it like that before. Isaac leaned back, folding his arms across his broad chest. "You saved a life," he said. "And instead of thanking you, they tried to erase you, twist you, make you into something they could understand." He shook his head slowly, "But you didn't fold. You didn't break. That's rare." The waitress returned, slamming 2 chipped mugs onto the table and sloshing coffee across the cracked surface. Neither of them moved. Neither of them cared. Isaac slid 1 mug toward Tariq. The boy wrapped his hands around it, welcoming the warmth, even as the bitter smell stung his nose. Isaac sipped his own coffee, studying Tariq over the rim of the cup. "You're going to have to make a choice soon," he said. "Keep running or start fighting." Tariq looked up sharply. "I am just a kid," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "They won't listen to me." Isaac smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was sharp, dangerous, hungry. "They won't listen," he agreed. "Not yet. But they'll have to see." He tapped a finger against the tabletop. "First thing you gotta do, control your story. You let them keep writing it, you already lost." Tariq frowned. How Isaac's eyes gleamed. Not with fists, not with yelling. He leaned forward, voice dropping lower. "You show them who you are, every step you take, every breath, every damn second. You refuse to disappear." He paused. "That's power, kid." Real power. Tariq stared down into his coffee, the steam rising like tiny ghosts. Could it really be that simple? Could surviving, simply refusing to break, be a weapon? Could standing tall in a world that wanted you crawling be its own kind of victory? Something shifted inside him, a quiet click, a door opening somewhere deep in his chest. He lifted his head slowly, met Isaac's gaze without flinching. "Teach me," he said. Isaac smiled again, real this time. "Already started," he said, lifting his mug in a silent toast. They clinked their battered cups together, the sound small but sharp in the heavy air. Tariq took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. But he swallowed it anyway. Because this fight, his fight, was not going to taste sweet. It was going to burn. It was going to hurt, and he was ready for it. Whatever it took, whoever stood in his way, the city had drawn first blood. Now it was Tariq's turn, and he would not be swinging alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. The plan did not come all at once. It grew slowly, piece by piece, like a bridge built across a chasm no one else believed he could cross. Isaac was not a man of many words. He did not hand Tariq a blueprint or a checklist. He simply pointed at the world, at the system, at the cracks already splintering under their own weight, and showed Tariq how to slip through, how to survive louder, how to resist smarter. "You don't have their money," Isaac said one night as they sat in the back of the diner, another plate of greasy fries cooling between them. "You don't have their power." "Not yet. But you got something they forgot about a long time ago." Tariq raised an eyebrow. Curious, Isaac leaned closer, voice dropping low. "You got eyes, you got ears, you got truth." He tapped his temple. "And once you know how to use that, you're dangerous." The first step was simple. Be seen on his terms. Tariq started walking different streets, the ones he used to avoid, the ones where his posters still flapped from light poles and bus stops. He did not tear them down. He let them stay. He let the world see his face day after day, not running, not hiding, a boy in a battered hoodie who refused to disappear. The second step was harder. He started talking, not yelling, not arguing, talking at bus stops and grocery lines, in broken down parks where old men played chess and mothers braided their daughters' hair. He asked questions, listened to their stories, listened when no one else did. And slowly, piece by piece, he built something stronger than fear. Trust. It was not perfect. There were still glares, still mutters under breath, still people who clutched their purses tighter when he passed. But there were also nods now, small ones, careful ones, but real, and that was enough. Words started to spread, not through headlines, not through viral videos, but through whispers and worn sidewalks. The story began to shift a little. A crack in the wall, and Tariq pressed against it with everything he had. He volunteered at the food kitchen, where he used to sneak meals. He helped fix up the broken benches at the park without anyone asking. He carried groceries for a woman whose car battery had died on the corner of 9th and Elm. Nothing huge, nothing flashy, just showing up again and again and again. And the city, tired, battered, suspicious, began in small ways to see him. Not all at once, not everyone, but enough to matter. Meanwhile, Isaac worked in the background like a ghost. He taught Tariq how to move without being noticed, how to listen to the things people said when they thought no one was listening, how to use what he saw, what he knew without ever swinging a fist. "The first rule of power," Isaac said one night as they sat on a rooftop overlooking the city, the lights blinking like 1,000 slow heartbeats below them, "is knowing you already have it." Tariq nodded. He was beginning to understand. The city had tried to define him by what he lacked. No home, no money, no famous last name. But it was not about what he did not have. It was about what he refused to give up, his dignity, his presence, his voice. The third step was the hardest. He had to confront the lies directly, not with anger, with truth, with evidence. Isaac helped him track down the source of the posters, a small group hiding behind fake accounts and throwaway phones fueled by fear and fed by hate. And when they found them, when they caught them on camera posting more flyers, defacing murals of black leaders with slurs, Tariq did not lash out. He did not throw punches. He recorded quiet, steady truth, and then he released it. Not through shouting, not through violence, through silence. He posted the footage without a caption, without a comment, just the truth raw and undeniable. The city reacted the way a body reacts to poison, finally brought to light with anger, with shame, with slow, painful healing. Those who had laughed at him, who had spread the rumors, found themselves on the wrong side of the story. And for once, Tariq did not have to say a word. The truth spoke loud enough. He stood on the sidewalk the night the news broke, watching the headlines flash across TV screens, through storefront windows, hate campaign expose, local teen uncovers, smear plot, city owes hoodie, hero an apology. He pulled his hoodie up tighter against the cool night air, not to hide, not anymore, but because it was part of him, his armor, his banner, his story. The city had tried to erase him, tried to paint him as a villain, tried to make him vanish. And he had answered not with fists, not with fire, but by standing, by enduring, by outlasting them all. And now they would never forget his name, Tariq Evans, the boy in the hoodie, the boy who refused to break, the shadow that woke up and refused to fade. When the city fell, it did not fall all at once. It cracked first, hairline fractures in the bright white smiles, splinters in the polished speeches, tiny breaks in the mask they wore so proudly. And once the cracks began, the rest came tumbling down faster than anyone could stop. Tariq watched it happen from the sidelines, the way a boy watches the tide pull away before a wave comes crashing back stronger than ever. He did not gloat, he did not cheer. He simply watched because he knew this was never about revenge. This was about truth. It started with Connor Blake, golden boy of Roosevelt High. The same boy who had shoved him in front of half the school, laughed into a camera, posted his humiliation for the world to see. When the footage surfaced, the real footage, the one showing Connor and his friends posting hateful flyers around the neighborhood, tagging walls with slurs, grinning as they filmed themselves, everything changed. The school moved fast. They had to. By noon the next day, Connor's basketball scholarship was revoked, his captain's badge stripped. His future, once paved in gold, now littered with cracks he could not step over. News crews circled the school like vultures. Parents demanded answers. Sponsors pulled funding. Colleges withdrew their offers. Connor tried to apologize, tried to spin it, tried to cry for the cameras, but the world had already made up its mind. And for once, it was not the boy in the hoodie standing on trial. It was the golden boy. The fall was not just his. It rippled outward. The businesses that had laughed quietly when the smear campaign against Tariq started, they found themselves boycotted. Shops emptied, windows, shattered graffiti. They could not scrub away fast enough neighborhood groups that had stayed silent when Tariq was dragged through the mud, now faced protests on their front steps. You cannot stay neutral when the truth is this loud. The city had been forced to choose, and it chose not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough to matter. Tariq walked the streets he once avoided, head high, hoodie up, step steady. Some people still looked at him with suspicion. Some still crossed the street, but many more now nodded as he passed. A small thing, but in a world like his, small things were mountains. He stopped one afternoon outside Willow Garden Cafe, the place where it had all begun. The tables still gleamed under crisp white umbrellas. The smell of rich coffee and baked pastries still floated through the air. But the mood had changed. Where once there had been laughter and easy arrogance, now there was a tightness, a carefulness. The memory of what had been done and who had stood against it lingered in the air like smoke. Tariq did not step inside. He did not need to. His presence on the sidewalk was enough, a reminder, a warning. They would never look at a boy in a hoodie the same way again. And if they did, if they dared, they would remember what happened the last time they underestimated the quiet ones, the overlooked, the forgotten, the ghosts in the crowd. Isaac met him later that evening, their usual booth in the back of the diner waiting for them. Tariq slid into his seat, still wearing the same battered hoodie that had become a symbol of everything the city tried and failed to destroy. Isaac raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. Tariq smiled a real smile, small and steady. It was not victory he felt. Not exactly victory implied an ending, and he knew better. This was just another beginning, another fight, another sunrise he would have to survive. But for the first time in a long, long while, he did not feel alone. He sipped his coffee, grimacing at the bitterness, and listened as Isaac outlined the next steps. Not revenge, not retaliation, rebuilding, restoring. Becoming more than just the boy who survived. Becoming the man who led. Tariq leaned forward, elbows on the cracked tabletop hoodie, casting shadows across his determined face. He was ready. The city had tried to break him. Instead, it taught him how to bend without snapping, how to fight without fists, how to win without ever lifting a weapon, and that was something no amount of lies could ever take away. The fall of Connor Blake and his circle was just the beginning. The wave that started at Roosevelt High crashed into the city with a force no one expected. Politicians who had once smiled politely while whispering about those kids behind closed doors now found themselves exposed. Journalists began digging, uncovering connections between smear campaigns and donations to certain city council members. Community leaders who had stayed silent too long lost their seats at important tables. City sickness had been festering under polished stone and polished smiles for years. Now the rot was spilling into the streets, and Tariq, the boy they once tried to bury, stood at the center of it all, not because he sought the spotlight, but because he refused to move, refused to be erased. He became something they could not ignore, and that terrified them more than any protest or angry headline. Tariq could feel it when he walked the streets. People whispered his name now, some with respect, some with resentment, but no longer with mockery that was gone, dead and buried, like the old version of the city they once believed was untouchable. It was a strange kind of power, heavy, dangerous if mishandled. Isaac warned him about it over coffee one night. "Power's a funny thing, kid," he said, stirring his mug absently. "Everybody thinks they want it until they get a taste. Then they realize it ain't free." Tariq nodded, understanding more than he could say. He felt the weight already, felt the eyes watching, weighing every move he made, waiting for a mistake, waiting for a reason to drag him back down. But he also felt something else. A responsibility not to be perfect, not to be a savior, just to be real, to stand in the space he had fought to carve out and refused to let it close behind him. The real test was not surviving the storm. It was what you built after it passed. And Tariq was ready to build. He started small, quiet. The way all real things start. He volunteered more hours at the food kitchen, not for cameras or headlines, but because he remembered what it felt like to stand in that line, stomach gnawing at itself, pretending you were not hungry. He joined neighborhood meetings even when the old men at the front sneered and the tired mothers in the back shook their heads. He spoke up carefully, clearly. He told a story, not the version twisted by gossip, but the truth. The streets that raised him, the fights he survived, the reasons he refused to back down. And slowly, painfully, people listened. Not everyone, not right away, but enough to start patching the cracks in the broken places. Enough to light a few fires in hearts that had gone cold from too many winters, spent believing change was impossible. Meanwhile, those who had once laughed at him found the world colder than they remembered. Connor Blake tried transferring schools. No one wanted him. His parents, once the darlings of every charity board and business gala, found themselves uninvited from events where their money once opened every door. Stores that had casually participated in the whisper campaigns found windows broken, sales plummeting, and customers choosing different streets. The city remembered. And the city had a long memory when it wanted to. Tariq did not celebrate. He did not need to. Watching them stumble over the lies they had built was enough. They were not victims. They were architects of their own collapse. And no amount of crocodile tears could wash the blood from their hands. Still, Tariq knew better than to believe the fight was over. Hatred did not die because a few bullies got caught. It hid, it changed clothes. It whispered in darker alleys and smiled sharper smiles. He saw it in the way certain police officers still lingered too long when he passed, in the way new posters started appearing cleaner, slicker, talking about law and order and preserving tradition. The war never really ended. It just changed names, but Tariq was ready for that too. He pulled his hoodie tighter around his face and kept walking forward, step by steady step, because the real battle was not for headlines. It was for hearts, for minds, for the small daily choices that decided what kind of city they would become. And he would be there every step of the way, not to burn it all down, but to build something better, something stronger, something that would last longer than fear, longer than hate, longer than even the memory of the boy they once tried to silence, the boy who refused to stay quiet, the boy who learned how to turn surviving into living and living into leading. Tariq Evans, a name they would never forget, a story they could never erase. No matter how hard they tried, the city learned something else too. It learned that change was not a parade. It was not fireworks or speeches under bright lights. Real change was slow, messy, uncomfortable. It came in the form of kids like Tariq refusing to bow their heads, came in whispered conversations over dinner tables, in quiet apologies offered too late, but still offered, came in the shifting of feet, the clearing of throats when old jokes no longer felt so funny. It came like rain soaking deep into the cracks, and Tariq hoodie pulled tight against the world, became the storm they could no longer outrun. There were moments when it nearly broke him, when the loneliness pressed so heavy against his chest, he thought maybe the city would crush him after all. When the old fear crept back, in fear that none of it mattered, that he was still just a boy, alone against a world too big to move. But every time that darkness closed in, something pushed back, a memory, a face, a voice. The old woman who pressed a $5 bill into his palm without a word outside the corner store. The janitor at Roosevelt who nodded at him once sharp and proud and kept walking. The little kid at the bus stop who pointed at Tariq's battered hoodie and whispered to his mom, "That's him. That's the one who helped." It was not a tidal wave. It was not an explosion. It was 1,000 tiny ripples spreading through a sea that had once seemed endless and uncaring. And every ripple mattered, every single one. Tariq understood now. This was never about being a hero. It was about being a mirror, holding up the truth until people were forced to see themselves, good and bad, for what they truly were. And sometimes, just sometimes, they chose better, not because someone told them to, because they wanted to, because they saw someone fight through the darkness and decided maybe they could too. Maybe they owed it to themselves to try. The last crack came sooner than anyone expected. A city council meeting meant to be boring, procedural, another box checked on the long list of things adults pretended mattered. Tariq was not supposed to be there. He had no fancy title, no donors, no microphone, just a seat in the very back row, hoodie up, eyes steady, watching, listening, waiting. The council was debating a new ordinance, one that would have made it easier to ban certain undesirable individuals from public spaces. Everyone knew what that meant. They did not say it out loud. They did not have to. The coded language was a second skin, but the city was watching now, because Tariq existed, because the lie had already cracked once and cracks once made only grew. When the vote came, something happened no one expected. One council member, an older man, gray hair, sharp suit, eyes tired from too many years of looking away, hesitated just for a second. Then he said no. His voice echoed against the marble walls like a gunshot. Another council member, a young woman who had once campaigned on cleaning up the streets, shifted uncomfortably, glanced at Tariq in the back row, and changed her vote too. The ordinance failed by 2 votes. It was not a revolution, it was not the end, but it was a crack, and Tariq smiled beneath his hoodie. Small, tired, real, after the meeting he slipped out before the cameras could find him. He walked the familiar, cracked sidewalks, past broken fences and boarded-up stores, past playgrounds missing swings and murals faded by rain, past all the places that had tried to forget him, and he let himself feel it. Not victory, something better. A beginning. The city was still broken, still bleeding, but for the first time it bled a little slower, a little less blindly. It had learned to feel the pain it once ignored. It had learned that boys in hoodies were not warnings. They were promises, promises that no matter how high they built their walls, no matter how loud they screamed their lies, no matter how long they tried to hold the door shut, the future would still find a way inside. Tariq pulled his hoodie tighter against the cool night breeze, not to hide, to honor, to remember, to remind himself in the world that the fall was not the end. It was the clearing of the ground, the making of space for something new to rise. And he would be there to see it, to build it, to fight for it, one step, one breath, one truth at a time. The city had changed, not completely, not cleanly, but undeniably. Tariq could feel it in the way the air shifted when he walked past certain corners, in the way conversations stopped a little less often when he entered a room, in the way people began to wrestle with their own silence, their own shame. It was not the kind of change you could hold up in a photograph. It was quieter than that, deeper, like seeds pushing through cracked concrete. And Tariq battered hoodie, worn-out sneakers, hearts stitched together with stubborn hope was part of that change. He did not stand at a podium. He did not lead marches or shout into megaphones. He led by being, by existing where they said he should not exist, by surviving where they had written him off, by thriving in a world that wanted him erased. That was his lesson. And slowly, it became the city's lesson too. One day, sitting on the broken steps outside the old library, Tariq watched a group of kids play in the street. Their laughter rang off the brick walls, high and wild and full of the kind of joy he had almost forgotten. Among them was a boy, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. It sagged off his shoulders, sleeves flapping as he ran, sneakers slapping against the pavement. And no one flinched, no one pulled their child away, no one whispered warnings. They just let him be a kid. Tariq smiled, something tight and aching loosening in his chest. That was the point. That was the fight. Not for headlines, not for revenge, for moments like this, moments where a boy could be a boy, unwatched, unjudged, unburdened. He leaned back against the sun-warmed stone, eyes half closed, letting the sound of their laughter wash over him. This right here was worth every bruise, every cold night, every bitter cup of coffee sipped in silence, because the real battle had never been about him. It had been about them, the ones coming after, making sure they did not have to fight the same battles, making sure they could start further ahead than he ever did. He thought of Isaac then, wherever he was, still moving in the shadows, still teaching in the way only Isaac could quiet. Steady, relentless. He had not seen the old man in a few weeks. No calls, no notes. But Tariq understood. Some teachers stay for the whole journey. Some only show up for the first few miles. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones you have to walk alone. He pulled a crumpled slip of paper from his pocket, the last thing Isaac had handed him before disappearing. 4 words. Remember who you are. Tariq read them again. as if the paper itself hummed with quiet power. He tucked it carefully back into the inside pocket of his hoodie. Over his heart, a weight, a promise. The city buzzed around him, cars grumbling past, distant voices rising and falling like waves. Life, stubborn and beautiful and messy. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his jeans. The kids playing soccer shouted in mock outrage as someone missed a goal, their voices full of life, of future. He turned away from the library steps and started walking, not because he had somewhere urgent to be, because he was not done yet, not even close. He had lessons left to teach, not with words, but with footsteps, with presence, with the simple, radical act of refusing to be erased. The sidewalk stretched wide in front of him, cracked and broken and beautiful. He stepped into it without hesitation, head high, hoodie up, heart steady. The city whispered around him, some voices still skeptical, some still bitter, but many more curious now, open, willing to learn, willing to change. And Tariq would be there walking their streets, standing in their parks, sitting at their tables, a living reminder of what could not be silenced, what could not be erased, because power was not about being loud, it was about being undeniable. And Tariq Evans had become undeniable, not by shouting, not by fighting, by surviving, by enduring, by existing louder than their fear. And every step he took now was a lesson the city would never forget, a lesson he would teach until his last breath, because his future was already unfolding beneath his battered sneakers, one cracked sidewalk at a time. The lesson did not come easy. It never does. Some days, the weight of it pressed heavy on Tariq's shoulders, making each step feel harder than the last. Some days, the city felt like it would never change fast enough, like every small victory was swallowed by a dozen quiet defeats no one else seemed to notice. But Tariq had learned something else from the streets. Change is not a flood. It is a drip, a steady, stubborn drip of truth against stone, wearing it down grain by grain until even the hardest walls fall. And he, the boy in the hoodie, the boy they tried to erase, had become that drip. He showed up day after day, small acts, small stands. And over time, the city had to learn to live with him, to respect him, or be left behind. At the youth center on Jefferson Street, the one where security guards used to follow him, aisle to aisle, the director now asked him to speak to new volunteers, tell them what it meant to really serve a community, not just visit it, not just photograph it, live in it, protect it, grow with it. He stood in front of a small group one rainy afternoon, hoodie damp from the downpour, voice steady as he spoke about dignity, about survival, about how easy it was to look away and how much power there was in choosing not to. Some of them listened politely, their eyes drifting to their phones. But a few leaned forward, a few nodded, slow and thoughtful, and that was enough. A few was always enough to start. At Roosevelt High, the school that once turned its back on him, new murals appeared along the long-forgotten hallways, not just of athletes and politicians, murals of local heroes, community organizers, single mothers, teachers who fought for every kid who crossed their classroom door, and somewhere along the back wall, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, was a boy in a hoodie standing tall against a storm. Tariq never said anything about it, never asked who painted it. He just smiled when he passed by, a small, tired smile, the kind you earned, not the kind you were given. On the streets, it was harder. Hard looks still followed him sometimes. Older men who had built their lives on the rules of survival, keep your head down, do not make noise, eyed him with suspicion. As if daring to believe in something better was dangerous, Tariq understood their fear, respected it even, but he did not bow to it. Because he knew that survival was not the only dream worth chasing. Sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes you had to fight for more. Hope, dignity, belonging, not just for yourself, for everyone who came after you. He visited the old corners where he used to hide the back steps of the library, the alleys behind the cafe, the cracked playground missing two swings, and he sat there, open, visible, unafraid. Some nights, the kids came to him, drawn not by fame, not by bravado, by gravity, by the quiet certainty that here was someone who understood without needing the right words. They asked him questions, hard ones. How do you stay standing when the world tells you to fall? How do you keep walking when every step feels like carrying 100 pounds? How do you believe in a tomorrow you have never seen? Tariq never pretended to have easy answers. He told them the truth, that some days you don't stand, some days you crawl, some days you just survive. And that was enough, because every sunrise was a chance to try again, a chance to fight back against the lie that said you did not matter. You mattered because you existed. You mattered because you endured. You mattered because you refused to let the world forget you. And every breath you took was proof that they had failed to erase you. That was the lesson, not survival without scars, but survival with pride, survival with purpose. Survival loud enough to crack open the hardest hearts and the deepest fears. By the end of that summer, the city looked almost the same from a distance. The same broken sidewalks, the same boarded up stores, the same rusted fences. But if you listen close, you could hear the difference in the way people talked, in the way they looked at each other, in the way they chose, more often than before, to really see the boys in hoodies standing at the edge of the crowd. And Tariq, he kept walking, kept showing up, kept teaching the lesson they had once tried so hard to silence, not by shouting, not by winning fights, by surviving, by standing, by refusing to disappear, and that was a kind of power no one could take away, not anymore. The lesson Tariq carried was not written in textbooks. It was etched into his skin by cold nights and broken promises. It was woven into the fabric of his battered hoodie, stitched by every hand that had ever tried to push him aside. It was burned into his bones by every step he took, when the weight of being seen, truly seen, felt almost too much to bear. And it was this lesson that he lived every day, not as a preacher, not as a symbol, just as a boy who refused to vanish. There were days the burden nearly crushed him, days when the whispers came back louder, days when old ghosts rose up, reminding him how easy it would be to slip into anger, into bitterness, into despair. But Tariq had seen what giving up looked like. It looked like broken men slouched on corners. It looked like abandoned dreams scattered across cracked sidewalks. It looked like silence where there should have been defiance. And he would not add his voice to that silence. He owed himself more. He owed the ones who came after more. One afternoon, he found himself back at Grant Park, the place where the first shove had come, where laughter had rolled over him like a tidal wave, where phones had flashed and recorded his shame. It was quieter now. The swings had been repaired, the fountain still dry but clean, the trash cleared away, a mural stretched across one of the back walls, a riot of color and hope, a boy in a hoodie standing tall against a city skyline, fists unclenched, arms open, no words, none needed. Tarek stood in front of it for a long time. He traced the lines with his eyes the way the artist had captured not just defiance, but something deeper, hope, endurance, an invitation to dream beyond survival. As he stood there, a small voice tugged at his attention. "Is that you?" Tarek turned. A little girl stood nearby, no more than 7 or 8, her backpack almost as big as she was. Her eyes were wide, curious, fearless. He smiled, crouching to her level. "I don't know," he said, voice warm. "Maybe it could be any of us." She frowned, thinking hard. "But it looks like you." she said seriously. Tariq laughed, a low, soft sound he barely recognized as his own. Maybe, he said again. The girl nodded. Satisfied, she ran back to her friends, their laughter bright as they tumbled onto the swings. Tariq stood slowly, heart heavy in a way that did not hurt. It filled him instead, made him stronger. The city was still rough, still full of cracks. But there was space now. Space for kids like her to believe they belonged. Space for boys like him to be more than warnings. Space for hope to grow in places once paved over by fear. He walked away from the mural, steps steady, hoodie brushing against the collar of his jacket. He did not need statues, did not need ceremonies. This was his victory. A city that still struggled, still stumbled, but a city that, at least sometimes, tried to stand a little taller. A city that, piece by stubborn piece, was learning the lesson he carried in every heartbeat, that survival was not enough, that existing was not enough. You had to build, you had to reach, you had to dare to be more, even when the world said you could not, especially then. The lesson was simple. You matter, even when they tell you otherwise, especially when they tell you otherwise. And no matter how many times they try to erase you, no matter how many lies they stack against you, your story is still yours to write, yours to live, yours to teach. Tariq crossed the street, weaving between cars and hurried pedestrians. Another day was unfolding before him, messy and uncertain, filled with challenges he could not yet see. But he was ready. He had been forged in harder fires. He had learned to find strength in silence, learned to find pride in survival, learned to find power in simply refusing to disappear. The city pulsed around him, noisy, bruised, alive, and Tariq moved through it. A ghost no longer, a presence, a truth, a lesson that would not be forgotten, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And as he disappeared into the shifting crowds, hoodie up, head high, the city whispered behind him, not with fear, not with mockery, but with something new: respect, recognition, hope. Because sometimes the greatest lessons are not shouted from rooftops. They are walked, day after day, breath after breath, by those who refuse to let the world decide who they are. And Tariq Evans had decided. He was not their villain, not their charity case, not their warning. He was their mirror, their conscience, their future. And he would walk that truth for as long as his legs carried him, no matter how heavy the world became. Morning broke, slow and heavy over the city, casting long shadows between the cracked sidewalks and weathered brick buildings. The streets were still wet from a night of rain. Everything smelled fresh and raw, like the world had been scrubbed clean, but not yet dried. Tariq tightened the straps of his backpack, pulled his hoodie up against the early chill, and stepped into the flow of the waking city. He moved like he always had, steady, deliberate, almost invisible. But he was not invisible anymore. People saw him now, not all of them, not every day, but enough to nod when he passed, enough to clear a path without shrinking away, enough to recognize the boy they had once tried to erase and respect the boy who refused to disappear. As he walked, memories clung to the corners of his mind: the courtyard at Roosevelt High, the jeering voices, the laughter when he stumbled, the flyers plastered on light poles, the spray-painted warnings, the silent judgment in every glance, and then the slow change, the tiny ripples of defiance, the walls that cracked, the lies that collapsed under their own weight. Tariq had not burned the city down. He had not overthrown it. He had outlasted it. And sometimes, most times, endurance was the sharpest blade. He crossed 9th Street where the old corner market used to be. It was boarded up now. A fresh "coming soon" banner stretched across the front, promising a community center. He wondered if anyone else remembered how it used to feel, that low thrum of suspicion every time he walked past the aisles. The way the clerk's eyes stuck to his back like burrs. Maybe they did. Maybe that was why they were trying to build something new there. Maybe. He walked on, past the basketball court where kids now played without being watched like criminals, past the food kitchen where volunteers passed out hot meals without side eyes or sneers, past the old mural, his mural, where someone had recently scrawled new words beneath a painted hoodie boy. "We see you." Tariq paused, heart tightening. He let himself stand there for a long moment, soaking it in, not pride, not satisfaction, something deeper, something quieter, belonging. He turned and kept moving. At the bus stop on Vine, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the scratched metal side of the shelter. The same hoodie, the same eyes, but not the same boy. That boy, the one who shouted, "Don't eat that," across a crowded patio, had been scared, desperate, raw. This boy, this young man, carried something else in his chest now. A weight, yes, but also a fire, a certainty. He knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew who he refused to become. Tariq hopped on a bus heading downtown. He grabbed a seat near the back, leaned his head against the window, and watched the city slide by, a patchwork of beauty and brokenness stitched together by stubborn hope. Nobody bothered him. Nobody filmed him. A small piece, but a real one. At Jefferson Square, he got off and walked the last few blocks. The courthouse loomed ahead, not as a place of fear now, but a reminder that battles were not always fought with fists. Sometimes they were fought with breath, with steps, with the simple, stubborn refusal to quit. He was not going inside today. He had no court date, no hearing, just a promise to keep. Outside the main steps, a small gathering was forming, kids in fresh hoodies and scuffed sneakers, parents with tired eyes and hopeful smiles, old men in worn jackets, nodding quietly to each other, a rally but not loud, not angry, a celebration, a promise that no more kids would be shoved into silence without someone standing up beside them. Tariq approached slowly. Some heads turned, some smiles bloomed. He felt hands clap his shoulder, felt arms pull him briefly into rough, wordless hugs. He said little. He did not need to. His presence spoke enough. The boy in the hoodie had become more than a headline, more than a warning. He had become a seed, and seeds, once planted, have a way of growing, even through concrete, even through centuries of fear and doubt and lies. Especially then, Tariq stood on the edge of the crowd, breathing deep, feeling the city pulse beneath his feet. There was more work to do, always would be, but today it was enough to stand, to be seen, to be real. Tomorrow, he would keep walking, keep fighting, keep surviving, because that was the lesson he carried now, the lesson he would pass down without saying a word, just by walking, just by refusing to vanish, just by existing louder than the noise. The hoodie was not just cloth and thread anymore. It was armor. It was history. It was hope. And Tariq Evans wore it proudly. As he took another step forward into a city still learning to see him, still learning to believe in him, still learning to believe in itself. As the sun climbed higher, the small gathering outside the courthouse began to grow. More faces drifted in, some familiar, some new, drawn not by banners or loudspeakers, but by something quieter, a pulse, a feeling, the slow, stubborn heartbeat of change. Tariq stayed near the edge of the crowd, his hands tucked into the front pocket of his hoodie, his body relaxed but alert. He was not here to be the center. He was here to be a witness, to be a reminder, to be a root under the surface, steady and unseen, holding the new growth in place. A young woman took the makeshift stage, a few old crates stacked at the foot of the courthouse steps. She was small, but her voice carried. She spoke of dignity, of struggle, of boys in hoodies who had to learn to fight battles they never asked for. She spoke of Tariq, not his name, but his story, and the story of every kid like him who had ever been told they were less. Tariq listened quietly, feeling the words settle deep into the places he had once sealed off. Places hardened by too many years of surviving. The woman finished her speech with a simple sentence that echoed across the square. "We do not ask for permission to exist." The crowd roared not with anger, but with something fiercer. Pride. Tariq felt it lift him, carry him, fill the hollow spaces that had once only known fear. After the speeches, people milled around, talking in low voices, hugging, laughing. Tariq moved through them like a ghost made flesh. A man in a rumpled suit, city official by the look of him, stopped Tariq with a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he said, eyes earnest and a little weary. "You woke us up." Tariq nodded once, accepting the words without basking in them. This was not about gratitude. It was about responsibility. Another woman, middle-aged, heavy coat, kind eyes, pressed a small paper into his hand, a hand-drawn flyer for a new youth program starting at the community center. "Hope to see you there," she said with a wink. Tariq tucked the flyer into his pocket, feeling its weight. Not paper, possibility. He spotted Malik across the square, the boy who once held a phone to his face, laughing as Tariq was shoved and humiliated. Malik stood awkwardly, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes darting everywhere but toward Tariq. Their gazes met for a brief second. No words, no anger, just a silent understanding. The past was heavy, but it did not have to chain them forever. Tariq gave him a nod, small, steady, an invitation. Malik blinked, surprised, then nodded back. Something shifted, something healed, just a little. The morning wore on. Tariq helped stack chairs, helped carry boxes, helped clean up the trash the wind scattered across the square. Not because anyone asked him to, because this was his city too, his streets, his people, his future. When the last crate was packed away and the last banner rolled up, Tariq stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, looking out over the now quiet plaza. The city stretched before him, imperfect, cracked, still bleeding from old wounds, but alive, still fighting, still reaching. He pulled his hoodie tighter against a breeze that carried the smells of hot dogs, exhaust fumes, and spring rain, and he smiled. A real smile, one earned the hard way. Behind him, someone called his name. He turned. It was Mrs. Coleman, the librarian who used to watch him like a hawk when he first started sneaking into the building for warmth. Now, she stood with a cup of coffee in each hand, offering one to him, peace offering. She said, a little sheepish. Tariq chuckled softly and took the cup. They sat on the steps together in silence, sipping coffee, watching the city pulse and breathe. "You did good," she said finally. He shrugged. "Still a lot to do." She smiled, lines creasing around her eyes. "There always is," she said, "but you made it a little easier for the next ones." Tariq looked down into his coffee, steam curling up into the cool morning air. He thought of all the boys still coming behind him, still fighting to be seen, still learning that survival was not the ceiling, it was the floor. And he made himself a promise. He would never stop walking, never stop carrying the lesson forward, never stop being a light in the cracks where hope struggled to grow. He finished his coffee, stood, and pulled his hoodie up once more. The city called to him, rough, messy, beautiful, and he answered the only way he knew how, one foot in front of the other, step by step, breath by breath. The hoodie walked on. And so did he. The city stretched wide before Tariq, alive with noise and color in the slow, clumsy rhythm of people trying, just trying to be better. He walked its sidewalks with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place inch by inch, breath by breath, not because the world had welcomed him, but because he refused to leave, refused to be erased. Each step he took now carried more than just his own weight. It carried the hopes of every boy who still pulled their hoodie up against the world, the ones still learning that their skin was not a weapon, that their silence was not consent, that their existence was not a crime. It was a strange feeling carrying so much without even trying, but Tariq bore it the way he had learned to bear everything else, quietly, steadily, proudly. He passed old haunts, places that once shrank from his presence. Now they nodded as he passed. Small things. A barista who remembered his coffee order. A security guard who smiled instead of scowling. A teacher who handed out books with covers that looked a little more like him. Tiny shifts, tiny victories, and each one mattered. Each one was a stone laid on the path for those who would follow. At the corner of 8th and Ash, he paused. The sky above was a deep, endless blue, the kind of blue that made even the battered skyline seem hopeful. Across the street, a group of teenagers loitered, laughing, shoving each other playfully. One of them, a lanky boy in a bright red hoodie, caught sight of Tariq and froze for a moment. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not awe, respect. The boy gave Tariq a nod sharp. Sure. Tariq nodded back. Connection made. No words needed. The boy turned back to his friends, shoulders a little straighter now, and Tariq smiled. This was why he walked. Not for himself. For them. For the ones who would never know his name, but would still walk a little taller because he had carved the path wider, because he had refused to vanish when the world gave him every reason to. He turned down a side street, sneakers slapping gently against the pavement, past a new mural blooming on the wall of an old bakery, fists raised, heads high, colors exploding across crumbling brick, past a bus stop where flyers for youth programs fluttered in the breeze, past old memories that no longer held him prisoner. He moved through it all like a thread stitching something broken back together. The city did not belong to the rich men behind glass towers. It belonged to the ones who kept walking even when the sidewalks cracked under their feet. It belonged to the ones who refused to bow their heads. It belonged to the hoodies, the forgotten, the unstoppable. Tariq crossed another street, weaving through traffic, never rushing. He carried his history in every step, the whispered insults, the heavy glances, the nights spent shivering under broken awnings. They lived in him, but they did not define him. They sharpened him, made him stronger, made him real. The world had tried to shape him into something easy to fear, easy to discard. He had shaped himself into something they could not ignore, not by changing who he was, but by daring to be exactly who he had always been, unapologetically. A boy in a hoodie, a heartbeat in the crowd, a lesson they could no longer unlearn. As he walked, the sun shifted overhead, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. The city's heartbeat matched his own, now messy, hopeful, fierce. Ahead, the streets stretched open, cracked and waiting, full of work, full of hope, full of stories still unwritten. And Tarek Evans, hoodie up, head high, heart steady, walked into them, not as a warning, not as a mistake, as a promise that no matter how heavy the world became, no matter how loud the lies screamed, no matter how high the walls were built, the hoodie would walk on, and so would he. Tariq's story reminds us that true strength isn't found in fists or fame. It is found in the quiet, stubborn act of standing tall when the world demands you shrink. It is found in every boy and girl who pulls their hoodie tighter and chooses to keep walking, even when the road ahead is cracked and cruel. In a world eager to write people off, Tariq wrote his own story, with every step, with every breath, with every refusal to disappear. Because real change doesn't come from noise. It comes from endurance. It comes from hearts like Tarek's unbroken, unbowed, unstoppable. And as long as boys in hoodies walk these streets with pride, the world will never silence them again. Before you go, we would love to know, where are you watching from today? What part of Tariq's journey spoke to you most? Drop a comment below. Share your thoughts. Your voice matters here. If you believe in the power of quiet strength, if you believe in standing tall when it's easier to hide, then hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell so you never miss a new story, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that they matter. This is Silent Power Stories, where every step, every breath, every story leaves a mark. We see you, we hear you, and we walk with you, always.